Today we're going to begin a series from the book of the Minor Prophets titled Major Truth from the Mouth of Minor Prophets. And the subject at hand will be taken from the book of Obadiah and is titled Letting Go of Our Grudges. To understand this book and to get all that God is trying to give to us from it, we're going to have to spend just a brief moment building the historical background so that we can, when we get to the application aspect of it, we could really put it in our lives and impact our lives as God would have it. So first of all, as we begin building the historical background, I want to let you know that what we have here in the book of Obadiah, we have uh, the Jews who at one point in their history had been unfaithful to God. I mean, God had been so good to them, but yet they have been so unappreciative. So what God did, God allowed them to be put into captivity, allowed things to happen to them to basically get them back on track. And God used the Babylonians to accomplish this. So then along comes Obadiah, a prophet, who God is calling to basically give his mind on the matter at hand. And he's basically a mouthpiece for God, delivering a word from God. And what he has in the book of Obadiah is a prophetic writing that contains warnings and judgments and punishments to the enemies of the Jews, or to the enemies of the Israelites, rather. But it also contains hope and deliverance for his covenant people in difficult times. But there's this one particular group that I want to kind of point out that God is calling down his judgment on, and that were the Edomites, or those that were the descendants of Esau. And what were they charged with, you might ask? Well, they were charged with mistreating the Israelites, who were in fact their relatives along the way. And they were mistreating them, and they held this animosity in their heart for the Israelites for some reason. Verse number 10 of Obadiah chapter 1, or verse number 11 rather, says that on the day you stood aloof while strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. You should not look down on your brother in the day of his misfortune, nor rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor boast so much in the day of their trouble. You should not march through the gates of my people in the day of their disaster, nor look down on them in their calamity in the day of their disaster, nor seize their wealth in the day of their disaster. You should not wait at the crossroads to cut down their fugitives, nor hand over their survivors in the day of their trouble. So what we see here, God is giving warning and judgment to the Edomites. And the Edomites had such animosity in their hearts that while the Israelites were being afflicted by the Babylonians in war, and while they were going through their wars and being put into slavery and being enslaved by the Babylonians, the Edomites gloated. First of all, the Bible says they stood complacent, they stood aloof, but then they gloated. It was that whole idea of, I hope they get what they deserve. Serves them right. They should have known better. There's that attitude of loving the fact that someone else is doing worse than you. But then they took advantage of the situation. They began to, their refugees, as they were fleeing the horrors and ravages of war, they began to capture them, enslave them for themselves, take them back to their enemies and sell them to their enemies. They were even killing some. They were loving the fact that Israel was at his lowest point, and it just made their day. Oh, they had such a blast. They were loving it because finally, in their minds, the Israelites got what they deserved. And so God pronounces his punishment against Esau for the animosity that was shown from their heart. And verse number 6, he talks about how their wealth will be removed. And verse number 7, he proclaims wars and violence and bloodshed to the Edomites. And verses number 8 through 9, he talks about how their wisdom will be taken away from them, and eventually they will be cut off from their land. And Edom, the Edomites, the land of Edom, would be no more. But how did this entire group of people become so ingrained with hatred for another group of people? How did animosity so consume their life that when people were being taken advantage of and people were experiencing the horrors of war, they felt it was prime time to get some shots in, if you will? Well, we would actually have to go back to the history of these two nations, to the forefathers or the founders of these two nations, in Jacob or Israel and Esau or Edom. And to understand that, to unravel that, we would have to go back to Genesis chapter 25. And that's going to give us a little bit of the history work. And we're going to get to the good part. Just bear with me as we unravel the historical data. So, chapter 25, verse 29, the Bible says, once when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country. Famished, he said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That is why he's also called Edom. Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look, I'm about to die," Esau said. "What good is this birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, and then he got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright. So you have Esau and Jacob. They were two brothers. They were heirs to the promise given to Abraham. However, one caveat, Esau was the oldest, and so by default, he should have gotten the blessing, the birthright, the inheritance, the family business, if you will. He should have been the one to carry on the family name along with all the material possessions of the family business because he was the oldest. But God had said that he's going to give the birthright to Jacob. Now, keep in mind, just because God said that he's choosing Jacob over Esau did not give Jacob the right to deceive and go about his deception. He did not have to deceive him in order to get what God had promised him. What should have happened is he should have waited till God gave it to him the proper way, but in his own thinking and own understanding, he wanted to bypass God and make for sure he got what God was going to promise him. And so he did that by taking advantage of his brother in a situation of weakness. He's coming in, he's hungry. "I want some stew." He's starving, hasn't ate all day. I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I'll give you some stew. Sign over your inheritance. Sign over your portion to the will. Sign over your portion to the estates that we know the Father's going to leave us. I want your portion because you're the oldest, and by default, you'll get more." And so Esau, not very bright, signed over his birthright. So how do you think Esau felt after he ate the stew and realized that this is my brother? He's not going to let me starve to death. He would have gave me the stew eventually. Or I could have just told Daddy and made him give me some stew. He probably felt used, foolish, hurt. He probably also felt, how could my brother dupe me like this? Okay, keep this in mind. So later on in the process of time, chapter 27, Isaac their father is beginning to die. And as he beginning to die, he's now in the process of divvying up basically the estates. And once again, to the older, he gets the larger portion, and the younger would get, enough to make a, pretty decent living. But Jacob, along with his deceptive mother, formulated a plot to make sure that they were going to get what God had promised them. They wanted to make sure they were going to get that birthright, along with that property, and along with their portion of the will. So he tricks the father into thinking, because the father's blind at this point, and I'm just paraphrasing the story, the father's blind at this point, so he tricks the father into thinking that he is Esau, because Esau was a daddy's boy. He was a hunter, he was a man's man, he drove a F-150, like the deer hunt, he was a man's man. While Jacob, he liked to be with his mother, he probably liked pottery and, flowers and stuff like that. He liked to hang out with mom. He's a mama's boy. So he dresses up, because his father's blind, like he's Esau, tricks the dad into giving him the birthright. Dad hands over the blessing, gives him not the birthright rather, but the actual blessing, blesses Jacob, and then Jacob then goes on. Verse 6 of chapter 27. So he went to him and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field. May God give you a heaven's dew and earth of riches, abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you, and may peoples bow down to you. Be lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mothers bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. And after Isaac finished blessing him, Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence when his brother Esau came from hunting. So Esau comes in, and the father responds, "Hey, I just talked to you." Son responds, "No, you didn't." Once again, paraphrasing it. "Well, then who was that I just blessed?" And then it dawns on Esau, that little trickster Jacob. He duped me again. So he cries out, verse 34, with a loud, bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me too, my father. Father, do you have anything in the will for me? Any property, anything for me? Bless me too, my father." What he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." And Esau said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? He has deceived me these 2 times. And he took my birthright, and now he's taking my blessing." Then he asked, "Haven't you reserved any blessing for me?" And so as the story moves on, basically, verse 41 says Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. He said to him, "The days of mourning for my father are near, and then I will kill my brother Jacob." And of course, Jacob's not a fool, so he left the house, understanding that big brother wasn't too happy with him. But do you see how that animosity couldn't grow in his heart? I mean, he was lied and deceived. He was duped by his own flesh and blood. There was nothing nice about this. There was nothing considerate about this. He was taken advantage of by his flesh and blood. And I can just imagine the resentment that he felt, the pain and the hurt and the disappointment. And the Bible said he held the grudge because in his mind, you know what? He got me twice, but one day I'm going to get him back. This is the story. This is the beginning of the animosity between Edomites or Edom and Israel. Now, later on in the history, somewhere at one point, Esau and Jacob, they get together for a brief moment, only under pretense of Esau saying, "Yeah, I've forgiven you. I'm not worried about that stuff." But Jacob, for some reason, there was just some animosity there because for some reason, Jacob didn't quite believe that. So he went ahead and sent his family ahead and said that I'll be there in a minute. And he actually didn't show up. because there was probably still some type of ill feeling, even though Esau uh, presented himself as though he didn't have a grudge. And so what happens? Process of time. Esau has children. Those children have children. They become a nation. They become the Edomites. But somewhere along the way, the story was passed along from generation to generation of how their kinfolk, the Israelites, took what should have been theirs. They should have been in the limelight. They should be the nation of God. They should be the covenant people. They should be the one that everyone's talking about. And the Israelites stole it from us. And that story was probably passed on from generation to generation. And the whole entire group of people grew up with this disdain for the Israelites, this natural hatred for them. Then finally, the time comes, as we bring it back to Obadiah, where the Israelites are down. The shoe is now on the foot, and we have the upper hand. We are a great nation. We're doing good. We're prosperous. While the Israelites are being torn down, they're getting stripped out of the land. Foreigners are invading it. They're ransacking it. And we have an opportunity, as they're down on the ground, to come by and step on their head to make sure they never get up. But where was that born out of? It was born out of, going back to Genesis 27, verse 41, a grudge that was festering in the heart of Esau. And that resent began to grow into a seed of bitterness. And that seed of bitterness began to sprout up into a tree. And this animosity and this anger and these ill feelings begin to fester and completely consume them, to the point that a feud over centuries ago is enough reason for me to mistreat you. And as a result, the Edomites lost everything. God pronounced his judgment on them. He said, I'm going to take away everything from you. Your wealth, your wisdom, your prosperity. Matter of fact, I will take away from you your land. And you're going to experience war and violence and bloodshed. Why? Because you allowed your bitterness to get the best of you. That grudge grew into something cancerous that began to eat you from the inside out. Did Esau have a right? Yeah, he had a right to be upset. He was wronged. Did the Edomites have a right to be upset? Absolutely. But the question is, as we start bridging the gap, making it applicable to our lives, what should he have done with that bitterness? Should he have kept it and nurtured it and babied it? Or should he have expressed it, acknowledged it, and dealt with it, and then moved on? Perhaps you have been wronged in your life. You say, you don't understand. I'm bitter, but I have a right. You don't understand what it's like to be sexually abused. You don't understand what it's like to grow up in a household where your father and your mother, they fight like cats and dogs. You don't understand what it's like to grow up in a house where there's alcohol and drugs. And you don't understand what it's like to have a father abandon you. And you don't understand what it's like to be the victim of racism. You tried to do everything right, but yet somebody, because of the color of your skin, felt you weren't good enough. You don't know what it's like to have this pain and this hurt when you pledged your life for this person, for the better or worse, and then they go off and leave you for someone else. You don't know what that pain feels like. And so what do? You hold on to that grudge. You hold on to that bitterness with the intent of one day I'm going to get them back. But I'm here to tell you, the pain that you will cause them will never be equal to the pain that they've caused you. Furthermore, holding grudges, that bitterness will begin to eat you from the inside out, because what you're doing, you're carrying a burden, you're carrying a load that your shoulders were never designed to carry. And here you are in your life 20, 15 years later, uh, angry to the point where your health is affected, to the point where your blood pressure is up, to the point where you have heart problems, to the point where you have mental issues. And this person might not even remember you or even remember the pain that they've caused you. And what you're doing, you're giving them the keys, the power over your emotions, because every time you think of them, every time you look at their name in the paper, every time you even just recall them, you begin to relive that situation over and over again, imprisoning yourself. And they have the power over your emotions, because it doesn't take much for them to get you worked up. What are you saying? Don't be like the Edomites who lost their entire existence because they just couldn't let go of that grudge. Are we saying to let them off the hook? No, it's not about letting people off the hook. Rather, it's about taking them off your hook and putting them on God's hook. For vengeance is his to repay. And there's nothing that I can think of creative enough that will repay you for what you've done to me. So I give it over to God, because he's a lot more creative than I am, and he's a lot more just. And he will make sure that justice will be served. But in the meantime, I have healing to do. I have pain to remove, because I can't even experience. See, the Edomites, they had been blessed. Even though they didn't get the initial blessing, they still became a great nation. They just weren't the nation of Israel. And they still were prosperous. They just weren't as prosperous as Israel. And they were still loved in God's sight, but yet they couldn't see past all the stuff that they did have, because they were so focused on what they didn't have and the pain and the resent that was caused to them. As I bring this to a close, the major truth from the mouth of this minor prophet: let go of your grudges before they, like cancer, begin to consume your entire existence, to the point where you can't eat, you can't sleep, you think about, you long for getting them back. And then you wake up one day and realize your life has been passed away, because you spent all that time planning to get back at somebody who's already dead, or who doesn't even care. And that is God's mind on the matter at hand.